Welcome, everyone. Hello, everyone. We are so happy to be here today at the MEGAMIGS to talk about what we really love at Motive, which is making games, and to be able to talk about our development processes is a privilege. Um, we have a lot to talk about to go over today. So, without further ado, let's get right to it. Uh, the name of this presentation is the life cycle of an insight. At Motive Studio, we really care about the player, and thus we get in touch with our players. And for that, we have processes, research processes, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Because making sure that doesn't disrupt production is easier said than done. And for that, we use the life cycle of an insight. But before we go further into that, let me present my co-presenters today. We have Marion Isabelle Musinski, experienced design director. We have Alan Hill, analytics manager or analytics expert. We have Alma Talbot, development manager, here to speak to the production side of things. And myself, Philippe Renaud, UX research, user experience research manager. So to quickly go, here's the blueprint of our presentation. Here is a quick overview of what we're going to talk about, the story we're going to tell you today. First, Alma will kick us off and talk a little bit about Motive, who we are, and who the studio is. Second, Marion will kick us off with by explaining how important it is in our process to start with clear video game design intention and all the ripple effect that it has on the development process. Third step, I will step back. I will be back and start talking about how we can utilize those intention to execute on smart, usable, actionable research. Step number 4, my colleague Alan Hill will speak to his side of things and how analytics also contribute to that research process. Step number 5, Alma will step in and wrap it up by explaining how all of these insight and all of the player knowledge, how we utilize it to implement into the production flow. That's easier said than done in order not to create disruption and not to mess our game even more. So that's what she'll be talking about. And I'll be back at the very end to be able to take a step back and look at what the cycle means. After all my co-presenter explained their bit, I'll be in a position to really explain what the life cycle of an insight means for us and how it helps us make better games. So without further ado, Alma, take it away.
Thanks so much, Phil. So once again, my name is Alma Talbot, and now that we've all introduced ourselves, I'll let you know a little bit about who we are at Motive. So Motive is a AAA video game development studio established in 2015, located in Montreal, Quebec. The studio is part of the Electronic Arts Studio Network, and we have worked on action-adventure licenses. Motive supports the solo campaign on Star Wars Battlefront 2, and we were the lead developers on Star Wars Squadrons. Our team is currently working on the Dead Space remake. Our motive is to create innovative AAA action-adventure games with iconic worlds where every player feels like the hero. Our offices are located in the heart of downtown Montreal, and we're fortunate enough to host other talented teams in our office as well, including the Frostbite Engine team and the Search for Extraordinary Experiences division, otherwise known as SEED. The studio is growing, and we've recently announced that we're expanding our recruitment efforts to Quebec City and Toronto. And I'll talk a little bit now about the goals of our presentation. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how Motive puts the players at the center of our development process. And we're also going to talk about Motive's cross-functional collaboration philosophy. We want to ground all this as well in real-life examples from the development of Star Wars Squadrons. So I'll talk now a little bit about Star Wars Squadrons as a game, for those of you who might not be familiar. So Star Wars Squadrons shipped in October of 2020. It's a flight simulation game set in the Star Wars universe. There is a single-player story mode, as well as 2 multiplayer modes, a dogfight mode and a flagship faction versus faction 5 versus 5 fleet battles mode. And now I'll pass it back over to my colleagues.
Thanks, Alma. Hi, everyone. So let's explore first, what do we mean by an insight? This presentation being called the life cycle of an insight, that kind of making sense for us. So the Merriam-Webster definition for an insight is an understanding of the true nature of something. Applied to game development, it's a piece of knowledge that informs the creation and the development of a game. For us, it's really key to discover this insight, and here is how we organize ourselves to do so. So the idea is really to start with a design intention and to forge this intention with the user in mind. As Phil said, player centricity is really important for us at Motive. At Motive, I lead the experience design group. What we do is helping to shape the creative vision, integrating the user perspective into the process to create flow, fun, and enjoyment. What do we mean by a good intended experience? So we design and integrate specific element of the interface with the user in mind because it is intended experience bathed into expected behaviors and user sentiment. Using those, our team can develop hypotheses that require testing. At Motive, the experience design team spans across 3 different specializations. When working on the intention, the key group is the UX team. Working with the game design team, we describe the intent and the projected result from a player perspective. What will happen in game and how we are expecting them to behave in the game. So that's prediction working. And the key is really to be able to design for multiple player type, sometimes close to what our designer are, but often different. Because we develop mainly action RPG games, our team often are tempted to design for self. And that's very dangerous because often an heterogeneous group of highly experienced players with a set of standards, expectation, and past knowledge is really different from the multiple group of end player that we are targeting. So it's really important that we make the difference. Empathy mapping is a great way to develop a deeper understanding of the player we are designing for. It externalizes the knowledge about them in order to create a shared understanding of the user needs, and it helps in decision making. It puts the focus on the player as an active component of a creative process. This is what we mean by player-centric. We need to deeply understand the users, but we must also be able to help our colleague understand them and prioritize their needs. It is a first step in the well-known methodology of design thinking. And we at Motive use a pretty classic version, highly inspired by the work of the Nielsen and Norman group, reference in experience design and in the design thinking field. Thus, it consists of quadrants. So the says quadrants contain what the user says out loud in an interview or some early usability story. It contains mostly verbatim and direct quotes from early research that we do on the player. The think quadrants capture what the user is thinking throughout the experience, what occupies the player thoughts, what matters to them. The does quadrants contain description of the action that the player takes. What do they physically and virtually do in the game, but also when playing. The feel quadrants is the player emotional state. What worries them? What does the player get excited about? Are they impatient, confused, worried? Players are complex human. Everybody is a complex human, right? So still quoting Nielsen and Norman group here, we often see juxtaposition between quadrants and also inconsistency. And you know what? It's totally normal. For example, seeing seemingly positive action but negative cause or emotion coming from the same player is something that we see often. This is where empathy maps become treasure maps that can uncover nuggets of understanding about the user. To go back to Star Wars Squadrons, when it comes to fleet battle, one of the player needs was to be able to play, have fun, and be successful thanks to their skills and playstyle, no matter what faction they choose and prefer. Are they more New Republic or the Empire? Because we all have a favorite one, right? And it is also no matter what class they choose and prefer. So no matter what the subgroup they choose to pick at the end, fighter, bomber, interceptor, or support. It is really important to respect the player individuality and their choices and to show them respect and fairness. And it's even more important in a universe like the Star Wars one. When we translate these needs into design intents, the famous design intents, it becomes the following. Player need to feel that each faction have an equal chance to win. And player needs to feel that the New Republic is as strong as the Empire and vice versa. We now clearly define what we want to achieve, what we need to achieve, and we are able to share the intent pretty clearly, those are 2 sentences, with the rest of the team. It may sound trivial, but alignment on these kind of things are really key in the success of both a game and a production. Another key point, we need to be able to gauge if we achieve this intention or not by translating this design hypothesis and design intention into measurable KPIs. And this is where our UXR partner take the lead, and Philippe will be the one explaining you this part.
Yes, we get to the point where we execute on research. So yes, again, my name is Philippe Renaud, UX Research Manager. So it's clearly important at this point, yeah, to go and utilize and do that transition. But first of all, what do we do? What will this piece be about? UXR, well, we help translate those design hypotheses into measurable KPI. When we know how we want the game to feel, when we know how we want players to play and to behave, it's about understanding what are we going to measure. Not only to actually have a concrete notion of how well we're doing, but also are we improving over time? So it's going to be about tracking our progress and how close are we to our goal or not. But before going even deeper into that, a quick word about the UXR team at Electronic Arts. We are a centralized team, which means we work on a variety of different projects, and we are blessed to have various infrastructure and various labs all over the world, helping us reach to a broader audience even. And our team is made of 2 big arms. The first arm is the research arm. So we're a group of researchers where with a cross-disciplinary expertise that comes from human-computer interaction, obviously, but also consumer research, cognitive science, psychology, and together, this is really when we all work together that we bring a lot of value to EA. The second arm is our operation arm. Project managers with expertise in communication, coordination, logistics, participants recruitment, fundamentally everything that is needed to help researchers connect with their players and make research happen. Another thing that needs to be said about the way UXR operate is that we're not content UX researchers, and in analytics we'll see as well, is we're not content creators per se. We're not artists, we're not designers. The way we step in and help is by fully understanding design intentions and really wrapping our head around what Marion's team wants to achieve. We can provide research to help them understand and forge their creative vision. But fundamentally, our role is to understand their design intention and really help them translate that into research goal. The second part of what we do is go and assess and then execute on our research to actually go and measure that user experience and go get the player feedback, go and measure and understand how they play and really connect the two and go and identify discrepancy. So fundamentally, where do we operate? We operate on the blockers because there are a lot of blockers between design intentions and how those intentions will materialize in the user experience. For all the reasons that Marion say, we don't make games for ourselves. We make games for the end user. And we're there to operate on these potential blockers. This list is not exhaustive. I'm only listing a few, but a couple of examples. Learnability, bad tutorials, right? When the game is not taught properly to the players. That's seriously a problem that have long-lasting effect on the experience. Friction points, confusion. You know, when you don't know where to go next in a game, that's frustrating. Accessibility. We want IDA, it's important. That's something we really care about because we want our game to be enjoyed by as many players as possible. Balancing. We'll talk about balancing a bit more. Everything about difficulty adequacy. Is the game too hard? Is the game too easy? And this is where UXR, we aim at identifying those blockers and help the dev team remove them. One of the things that got our eye in this quadrant example was balancing. Like Marion said, it was very key and core to the intention. It's a asymmetrical gameplay. The New Republic, the Empire, they don't have the same tools necessarily. So balancing the game and making it into a fair experience really required teamwork. Quick reminder of the design intention. Players should expect a sense of fairness between the faction and the perception that you can win no matter the faction you're playing. So what did we do? We are blessed in Montreal. We have great infrastructure. We have a great lab. So what we did, we invited players over to play our game. The right audience, people that we know were thrilled by the fantasy, that Star Wars fans, the real players. We invited groups of 20, 4 teams of 5, and they would go at it for a few hours, a day, sometimes a few days. We would be collecting their feedback. We'd be looking at how they play as well. What's their strategy? What's their favorite type of ship? What type of weapons and components they're always using? Very, very informative for us. Obviously, all of that was happening after signing a very important, crucial NDA. And when we ask them, when we ask participants and players, what do you think of balancing? That's what's very, very interesting for us, because in terms of KPI, there was 2 things we were really looking at. One of the first thing, is there a trend? Are we seeing people complaining? Is there a consensus about balancing problems? Do we have people always complaining that maybe the New Republic is at an advantage? That was key. The other very important key factor I forgot to mention is the win-loss ratio. That's something that is measurable and very key. Is the New Republic always winning? So what we wanted was to make sure that the win-loss ratio would get close to 50% as much as possible. For us, that's a very measurable objective KPI that would have been proof that the game is balanced. Now, when we ask the participants to go back to their comments, when we just open, hey, what do you think of the game in general? We started getting comments like those. The big flagships were OP, overpowered. Star Destroyers, you cannot even get nearby. That's frustrating for players. Those are balancing issues. When I was playing the Empire side, the TIE Fighters don't have shield like the Rebel. Therefore, when I'm fighting in PvP, I don't have that extra protection. Again, that's frustrating, the sense of being unfair. I feel like I'm a serious advantage when playing the Resistance. That raises real flags for us. But that's not enough to send to the dev team and say, go fix balancing. We need to dig deeper and understand why. What's the root cause of that perception? And when we start looking deeper, we see shields. Shields were a concern. As we can say, we're looking at asymmetrical gameplay in Squadron. Having the New Republic with shields was meant to be counterbalanced by TIE Fighters being more nimble and shooting more precisely, but that didn't really translate well into player perception. But before sending all of that to on the production side and say, let's tweak and tune, we needed to make sure that indeed, because sometimes player perception is not reality. We needed to deep dive into other types of data to make sure that we were drawing the portrait of the situation, the real one, fully understanding the situation. And that is where our analytics partner steps in and helps. That's one way that they do. And I'll let Alan, my colleague, speak to that.
Thanks, Phil. My name's Alan Hill, and I'm the analytics manager at Motive. Studio Analytics helps to collect, organize, and interpret the data in order to obtain actionable insights. So we're similar in function to UXR, but we do it via in-game telemetry data rather than participant observation or player feedback. That can be helpful in large-scale player tests where it's not practical to directly observe every player, but it's also helpful in smaller UXR studies as well. Analytics covers a wide variety of areas to deliver value both to the business as well as the best player experience. We do this through a cross-disciplinary approach. There are some metrics where players are bad at self-reporting, or it'd be too distracting for them to report. So that's where we can supplement the more qualitative UXR data with the quantitative game data, and together we provide a more holistic view of the player experience. So for example, how long did a particular objective take, or how many times did you die in a particular match can be tough for some players to track. Even conflicting data has value. Sometimes players might report that a ship feels underpowered, but according to the data, it's actually doing well. So that also provides valuable insights to the game team about the player experience. We help improve the player experience by operating as an embedded function within the studio and game teams, supporting the needs for rich player behavioral analysis, mostly using game telemetry, from our experience design, UXR, and development teams. So on Squadrons, we were looking at balance. specifically faction balance. Of course, we want to avoid imbalance, as players don't want to start on a team that has a disadvantage. As you can expect, over development, there may be significant swings in something like faction balance. Ideally, though, we would hope that we could get closer and closer to balance the further along in development we are, with the ideal state being a roughly 50-50 balance. Obviously, in practice, it's not that smooth, as design changes and feature additions can impact the balance in unexpected ways. We're always trying to get closer and closer to balance the further along we go. And that's actually what we saw. Early on, we see the New Republic was a heavy favorite. By the time we got to some large-scale betas, the balance was much closer, but still wasn't quite where we wanted it. At this point, we were narrowing in on not just the shield's asymmetry, but also identifying if there were overpowered ship classes or components. By the time we reached launch, we had gotten to an acceptable balance range between the two factions across the primary game modes. Keep in mind, though, that even after launch, balance can change, either through the introduction of new ships or components, or simply by players learning new or more effective strategies. And next, I'll pass it over to Alma.
Thanks so much, Alan. So I'll talk a little bit now about my role as a development manager. So my role is to ensure that the insights generated from research initiatives such as UXR get translated into actionable tasks for the team. Part of my job is to ensure that the life cycle of an insight doesn't just end when the dev team receives the UXR report, but that we actually have a robust process in place to help us prioritize and react to feedback in a way that makes sense with our production timeline. So I'm going to make a slight disclaimer here that I'm going to shift our terminology a little bit. So what we've referred to as an insight up until now, I'm going to start referring to as feedback. Once the UXR data gets translated into our production tools, feedback is the dev-facing term that we use. So for this presentation, I want to use language that's consistent with what you might hear me say on the production floor. So these feedback points typically get delivered to the dev team in the form of a report, the UXR Insight Report, and it's up to production to ensure that this crucial player feedback gets translated into actionable tasks. And the first way that we did this on Star Wars Squadrons was to create a new JIRA issue type specifically to track feedback. Creating a new issue type came with an entirely new feedback workflow, and I'll get into the details of this in a minute. I don't know if we really realized it at the time, but we were basically establishing a new set of rules for how to process and act on feedback at the same time as we were shipping a game. So there was a lot of learning going on. It was a very fast-paced situation. On Squadrons, we were able to put in place a solid foundation for a feedback and iteration loop, but it also taught us a lot about what else we needed in the future to be successful. So there were three main things that I took away from that experience with the team. It was important to gather the right feedback at the right time to make sure that we were asking appropriate questions for the level of quality of each feature, to have a way that we could actually track our progress to measure whether or not our changes or our updates were actually impacting the end user, and to reduce noise because we actually have a diverse amount of feedback sources. So UXR is one of them, but we also consult the community council or other internal groups as well. So it became clear to me that we had a lot of stakeholders, but what we were lacking was a clear production point of contact who could drive the transition from UXR feedback into actionable dev-facing tasks. So on Squadrons, given that I was already managing the multiplayer modes and maps as part of the rest of my role, it was a natural fit for me to act as this production liaison on the team. That said, I think that all game teams can benefit from having someone in a role like this who can help drive these four core pillars home. Someone who can help drive credibility with our key stakeholders, someone who can help with our sprint planning to make sure that what we're doing is tracked and is manageable for the team to take on, someone who can help to ensure that we build a culture of playtesting internally on the team. So not only to make sure that our devs are actually playing the game on a regular basis, but it also helps to ensure that they're receptive to receiving feedback. And finally, to make sure that we have a JIRA-driven process that we can actually scale across the course of production. So a little while ago, I talked about how this whole feedback process started with a feedback issue type in JIRA. and there was a whole new set of structures and meetings and processes that came along with it. I want to talk a little bit about how that's evolved since Squadrons, because we've adapted it over time based on the various needs of different projects. So I'll walk you through what that looks like. On Star Wars Squadrons, we kind of had the first 3 steps that you see here, starting with the generation of the insights, the reporting from UXR, and then getting those feedback issues into Jira. So something like Phil mentioned, the New Republic feels OP. That's like a Jira issue type that you would see, a feedback Jira issue type that you might have seen in production at that time. Then, when we moved into live service, we realized we really needed to be more iterative. So we established a regular triage meeting where we could look at those feedbacks and we could prioritize quickly and make quick iterations. And then moving off of Squadrons, we also needed to scale this across a different kind of production. So now we entered into the final 3 steps. We added a process where we would link actual task issue types to the feedback just for continuity, and so that we could ensure that we were able to trace all the changes that we made attributed to a certain piece of feedback, to make sure that we were actually communicating all the changes that we were making with the team to help build a sense of ownership across everyone, not just within like the UXR and the production managers. So leveraging existing tools such as dashboards and regular team meetings. And then finally, to make sure that we were validating our resolutions. So for high priority issues, we want to make sure that we circle back and we retest things, and to make sure that what we've done actually has an impact on the player at the end of the experience. Overall, I worked on different projects, and different projects have different needs, be it a traditional or a live service production, or even a remake. Having adapted this process over the course of multiple projects, it's become clear that the one constant is having a feedback workflow that is fully integrated into the development cycle, because this ultimately empowers our team to make player-first decisions in our games.
Thanks, Alma. So here it is, folks. I think we've gone full circle now. We started Marion started by explaining the great care and how important it is to all start with concrete and very structured design intention, well-defined design intention. Alan and myself spoke to the research process and how we collaborate with both Alma and Marion to make that work. And Alma just explained to us all the work that goes behind processing those information and making sure that it has a positive impact and it's well implemented in the dev processes. So what we just told you fundamentally was that we're a group of various experts, right? Whether it's analytics, project production management, whether it's experiments, design, and we come together. And throughout at each step, we have the end user in mind. We work together to make that happen, and that's from the very beginning when we define what we want our game to be, up until we make the final tweaks before launch. So here it is. Let us take a step back and look at what we've been looking at for the last 30 minutes or so. That's what we call the life cycle of an insight for us at Motive. It all first starts with, if we look at the process from an agnostic perspective, it all starts with the design intention. Define the design intention and what good looks like. Right? What does success mean in our game? Just asking if the player thought it was fun, that's not enough. We want to hit the right notes. We want the player to feel a certain way. We want the player to behave a certain way. That helps us define KPI success. Early on, we talked about identifying trends and consensus and staying away from players admitting that, yes, feeling like the New Republic or the faction was OP. That's the example here. So what does success mean? And having clear indicators that we can track over time, because that loop is iterative. Executing on the research, that could have many forms. It could be rapid iterative playtests that you run with colleagues internally, depending on the means and the world you live in. It could be those large scale playtests, internal beta, external beta. There's a lot of different tools, but executing on a research is key. Taking a step back, looking at doing the analysis and generating insight means looking at what players said, like Alan explained, looking at how players are playing, and draw a real portrait of the situation. Make sure that you're looking at a phenomenon for every angle. That allows us to give Alma's team on the production side insights, valuable, actionable research that dev teams and designers can use to tweak and improve their game. And that brings us back to the design intention, reviewing them if necessary, and then the wheel starts and spins again. It needs to spin from our perspective, it needs to spin on as many game feature and game components as possible. It's not that process. It's not about saying research, check, done. It's about tweaking, and it's about revisiting that loop as often as it needs to be revisited. What does it mean for our squadron example? Let's quickly go over this using the squadron example, because that's how our minds operate. Concrete examples helps understand. So if we revisit our squadron example, first Marion explained to us that it was key for devs to have both factions, the New Republic and the Empire, feel balanced and fair. No matter in which team you would, in which faction you would land, you'd feel like you have a decent and fair chance to win. What kind of KPI comes out of that? Well, first of all, we want to avoid trends in consensus or in players' feedback in terms of balancing. But one very key measurable KPI is the win-loss ratio, which we wanted it to be around 50% as much as possible. We invited players over to our studio to play the game, groups of 20. We executed on internal, external beta. Alan explained to us that it was also variables that we were tracking at launch to make sure that the game was balanced. And while we were doing it, we will always take a step back, collect player feedback. What are they complaining about? What do players think is the source and the root cause of imbalances? But also, which ship are they overutilizing or underutilizing, maybe? All of that deep dive in the analytics helps us understand and provide the situation and provide the right information to Alma's team, who just explained to us the workflow that she applied on Squadron to tune and adjust ships. That was really, the devil was in the details in this case. And that helps us tweak things such as hit points, speed parameters to the various ship class. And then allowing us to revisit the player intention and retest and reassess and have that wheel spin as often as it needs to be for the game to be ready at launch. So here it is. Here we go. Folks, that's the life cycle of an insight. I want to leave you with two big principles, two big ideas that are really core to Motive's philosophy and how we develop game. First of all, Motive is a player-centric studio, and we put the player at the center of what we do from the beginning to the end. That we believe is a key component of our success, and we also believe that that's the thing that is true and remains true in video game development in general. No matter the size of your team, no matter the types of game you're developing, all of that remains true, and that's really something that we live and die by. The second piece is we are a collaborative, inclusive studio where people with different expertise come together to do their best work. You've seen it in that cycle. Marion, Alma, myself, Alan, we all own a piece of the cycle, but we work together. We consult each other. We trust each other. We lean on each other, on each other's expertise. We are not working in silo. Making games is hard. And that's why we do it together. And that is very core. And again, that principle is true. No matter how big, no matter the size of your team, no matter the organization you're in, that is a very important principle that again, we believe is key to Motive success. So that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much. I want to thank my co-presenters as well, Alan, Alma, Marion, and everybody who will help us put together this talk. Thank you so much for listening this morning, listening to us speak about what we love so much, which is making games. I hope we have a little bit of time for question now. Do we?
Yeah, it looks like we've got a little time here. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat or the Q&A tab. We'll be taking a look at both. The first question I would say is probably for Phil, and Melanie and Isabel, if you want to jump in, that'd be great too. So it's from Morgan. This might be an obvious question, but how do you know what players think and feel, i.e. what tools do you use? So Phil, if you want to jump us off there.
That's a great question. Thank you, Morgan. There are different ways to do it, to go at it and do it. First of all, I'd say we start very little, but with a small scope. So when we invite people, we sit down and we have a chat after the experience. So that one of the core tools that we've been using is we're early on in development, we're one-on-one interviews with a structured guide and to have clear questions and just ask and let player explain how their opinion. So the individual interview, just sitting down and having a face-to-face, honest chat about the game. And as we are researchers, we're not designers. We don't take it personally in the sense that we don't. There's no sense of the participants or user complaining or criticizing the work of the designer. That's kind of where we help. We also use, when we have bigger sample size, when we have a bigger amount of users playing simultaneously, we use surveys. Surveys are always interesting, whether it's via questions with scales or just open-ended question. Another way we tend to use it as well is asking players to think aloud while they're playing. This is not easy to do, but it's something that can be very useful when we are observing a player's play and just asking them to speak their mind as they're playing, thinking out loud. It may sound counterintuitive for the player, but it's very it could end up being a gold mine for us in terms of investigating player perception. Marion, am I missing anything?
Actually, I'm just going to add on what you just said. I must say that observation is really key. We always talk about like the ability to be empathetic with the player, etc. So by observing them and by observing all the little things, the gesture that they take, the face movement that they do. Sometimes they just like. So you see that something is happening, so you can ask them what is happening right over here. We also, and we don't use it as the moment, but biometrics could also be a nice and interesting way to catch up all those feelings and what the people are actually doing. And it's something that we really need to take on top of what Alan's team is doing, because as we mentioned in the presentation, it's really important to rely on what people are saying, but also on what they are doing, so we can have a better understanding of the global view.
Great, thanks.
There's no mind reading, though. Just wanted to be clear about that. No magic.
All right. Next question is for Melanie and Isabel from Matthias. What are some of the main UX philosophies leveraged by your team? For example, Celia Hoden's UX recommendations, etc.
Thanks for the question, Matthias. We do use the different framework, and yes, Celia Hoden's one is one of the many that we use. We try to use framework that have been proven in the past, but we also like to test our own poutine. So this is why we do have teams working on some experimental testing. But yes, regarding the biggest framework, Celia Hoden's one is really interesting. And we also tend to look around the video game industry to be able to catch up some trends and maybe interesting framework outside of what we are doing. So on the application design side, also on the service design side, those could be inspiration to building great games.
Great. Next one's for Phil from Morgan again. How have you adapted your playtesting during COVID?
Yeah, I could have actually, we could have done a whole presentation on that. So yeah, again, great question, very on point, Morgan. It was hard, and I'm not gonna lie. The first day we were locked out of our lab when thing really exploded almost all over the world at the same time. We needed to be quick to adapt. One of the first things that we started, we had to consider remote testing. Now, why weren't we doing more remote testing and actually sending the bill into people's home and connecting via Zoom like we are doing right now, or via other types of obviously. I think one of the great concern is security. We want to control. We want people to have surprise at launch, right? We want to surprise our player. We want to come up with the content, and we want them to see it when we're ready. So everything about security was we're concerned, but that's one of the big ways that we started doing it. Is literally utilizing technology such as a Parsec, which is a well-known tech in the platform. Another one that we started working really hard with our internal partners to develop a streaming gaming, to develop our own streaming application, our own streaming solution to get the game into players' home in a very secure way, ideally lag free. That was not easy. That was one of the key solutions to stay connected to players. Another thing that we rely on, which is not usually not ideal, we are fortunate enough. EA, we're a big group, we're a big company, so we started also running a session and looking at players all over the world, friends and family. I had a lot of EA employees. They have teenagers in their home. They have, so this is also what we started leading on. EA employees are not the end user, so we needed to take things into perspective, and there were a lot of caveats, but those were kind of the plan B on day one. Now, that being said, moving forward, as we are slowly getting out of that pandemic, we are slowly but surely reigniting our on-site process. We are now welcoming people in safe ways with great processes and all the social distancing required. And more, we are welcoming people back in our studio. And we will keep moving forward those remote testing methods because we got comfortable with them. A lot of our players got comfortable with them as well. We trust our players. EA playtesters don't tend to be leakers, and we're very grateful for that. So moving forward, I think we're gonna be looking at an hybrid model.
All right, Phil.
But again, that could be a talk only on that.
We've got about 30 seconds left. Do you think there's such a thing as gathering too much data from analytics, or is gathering more data from every part of the game always better? I think that's part of the job of analytics, is to sort of sift through the huge amount of data and really figure out what would be most useful for the game team to understand. Alma, real quick, was there any challenges developing the feedback workflow pipeline and getting the production teams involved in supporting this new type of Jira?
Yes, there was a lot of challenges because, like I said, there were a lot of stakeholders. So there were a lot of people who were peripherally need to know kind of stakeholders and having interest, but there was no clear like one person who was driving the whole thing. So it was easy to get buy-in insofar as everybody understood that it's important and valuable, but it was harder to get a firm process in place, especially while we were shipping. So what we've done now was to kind of come at it early in pre-production for other games to kind of establish that process early on and to get early buy-in so that we don't have to kind of fly by the seat of our pants for future projects. There are a lot of learnings, but getting set up early definitely makes a huge impact to getting buy-in and having something that's sustainable over time.
All right, fantastic. It looks like we're out of time. I'm sorry we can get to all the questions, but thank you so much for coming today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.